First of all, thanks for the invite. I think Mark was very, very persistent when I was trying to, so I think he got me on the third attempt. So yeah, it shows persistence works. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit more about opportunities, scaling, and execution. So I actually changed the title a little bit because I thought this would be more relevant to most of entrepreneurs rather than like financial services. So we're going to start by a quick video of what Revolut do.
Well, to start, I download the app from App Store or Google Play and register with my mobile number. Instantly, I can see my Revolut card details that I can use for online purchases, or I can order the card to be delivered to my home address, and I can access the new PIN number for my card as soon as it arrives. When I go abroad, I simply upload money to my Revolut account and pay everywhere with my Revolut card. It doesn't matter where I am, in Thailand, Brazil, or South Africa. For each transaction, my Revolut card looks at my available balance and converts it to the local currency automatically using the best possible rate. I can even exchange money I've already uploaded. It costs me nothing, and it means I never have to use an exchange bureau again. If family and friends need to send me emergency money, I receive it instantly, no matter where I am, and I can even transfer money to pay for my mortgage back home. I love living an international life, and Revolut is an important part of it.
Cool, yeah, so our solution is actually very, very simple. You can exchange money, you can send requests, and most importantly, you can do FX transactions for free. So some high-level numbers in terms of our traction. So we launched about 3.5 years ago. Total investment about 350 million. We actually have over 650 employees now. Number of customers is actually over 3 million, and with about 70,000 registered businesses and 4 billion in US dollars transaction volume monthly. Some fancy graphs. More graphs. Cool, so the fun part. So yeah, what's next? What are we planning? So first thing is Revolut Wealth. So I've been building this for a while now. I mean, if you're a Revolut user, you know in the More tab, you've been seeing the Wealth coming soon for a while. So it's actually super exciting. So you can buy like ETFs or different types of wealth products, essentially like almost for free. And effectively, in the back end, we're working with like an active fund manager that basically, based on your risk appetite, helps you rebalance your portfolio automatically. So you don't have to pay like high fees, and you don't have to have a big deposit amount to like big investment funds or hedge funds. Commission-free trading. So this is coming Q1 next year. So effectively, we're trying to make financial services available for everyone. So we did it for FX, and we're simply doing this for stock trading as well. So this is coming, I think, February or March next year. And finally, bank license application. We're going to get it very soon, hopefully by December this year. And this will enable us to take deposits, provide deposit insurance, and basically make investments and lend using client funds. And finally, we're going to launch in our key markets in US, in Americas, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand by Q1 next year. So the topic of today's session is how do we do it? So it's a question I get a lot from a lot of people, a lot of my friends, a lot of my colleagues from other startups. It's actually not not secret. It's actually quite simple, really. So I break it down by essentially 4 things. We essentially approach the problem. So the first one is a problem-solving framework. Second is we divide problems into big problems. Some people call opportunities, smaller problems, and execution. So the first one is the problem-solving framework. So this is something I advocate a lot in the company, and this is how we generally how we approach problems in general. So the first one is don't be like Greeks, be more like Romans. So what does that mean? So Greeks are known for being very theoretical, and in fact, like Western philosophy, Western politics, Western economy, Western everything is basically based on the Greeks. And what I found is when I hire these people, or when it's a recent graduate, they always think, in theory this works, in theory this works, but in practice it doesn't work, things break, right? So be more like Romans. So Romans are super practical, they're very pragmatic problem solvers. So our framework is quite simple. Be data driven when you can. So I hear this a lot when in startup talks, always be data driven, blah blah blah, right? But in fact, because more often than not, we're doing something new, right? Something no one else has done before. The data is simply not there. So how do you make a decision with the absence of data, right? So this is where heuristics come in. So heuristics is actually a very, very important framework we use when we're making important decisions. In order to use heuristics effectively, we basically gain a broad understanding of how everything works. So for example, for us, even if it's not really relevant for us, but we gain a broad understanding of how everything works from, before we even decided to launch stock trading. We actually did some research to understand how stock trading works, right? Or how payments work, or how, building a bank works, how everything works, how monetary policy works. We didn't really understand, we didn't really know, for example, taking building a bank as an example. On day one, we didn't want to build a bank. And in fact, we didn't want to build a bank until maybe 2 years ago. We decided actually it might be a good idea, and simply because we did some research. Really Googling Wikipedia, how banks work, and we started to understand more and more about how the fractional banking system works, how the economy works, how interest rates play into the part of how banks essentially drive the economy, and that's how we decided using heuristics. Let's be a bank, why not? And most importantly, teach people how to use Google. You'll be amazed how much information Google is. And in fact, I would say 9 out of 10 people I meet don't actually know how to use Google. In fact, when I joined Revolut, I remember I knew nothing about payments. And in fact, the founders knew nothing about payments. So what I did was, I Googled, what is payments? How does payment work? How does bank payments work? How does MasterCard work? How does Visa work? And bit by bit, you piece everything together. You speak to people, you read loads of Wikipedia pages, and you go very, very deep, like 10 links deep, and then you spend your Sunday afternoon reading Wikipedia until you realize, shit, it's all past midnight. So yeah, next one is big problems, right? So how do we tackle bigger problems? How do we launch stock trading, right? How do we decide to launch it? Or how do we decide to launch merchant acquiring when we want to compete with the big acquirers like WorldPay? Effectively, we use this big problems framework, right? So how do we define big problems? Problems you need to solve to take your business to the next level. That's how we define it. So our approach is quite simple. Create a culture to encourage everyone to think 10x, right? Anything less than that is probably not interesting. So a very, very practical example. If you're working in a startup, right, and you're thinking of, okay, I want to A/B test this. More often than not, you're probably doing it wrong, because A/B testing is essentially what we call last mile optimization, right? If you look at the Google page, changing the color of the button, changing the size of the button, changing the font of the button, A/B testing it will probably give you 1% optimization at best. Who cares? This is not interesting, right? And startups, especially early stage, small startups, you need that 10x growth, and A/B testing is not the way to do it. Another good example is machine learning. I hear this so much. In fact, I'm so sick of the word machine learning. Honestly, on day one or even day two or even today, before I'd say 6 months ago, we haven't even implemented machine learning. We only started doing machine learning when heuristics stopped working, right? When we built, for example, our transaction monitoring rules, everything was rule-based, right? Everything was common sense, right? Based on macro industry trends and internal data, we built rules. We're using heuristics, and then to optimize it further, that's when we use machine learning. So if you're very, very early stage in your startup, machine learning more often than not is useless, and you're wasting your time. And lastly, if the idea is too uncertain but could win big, do it anyway, but do it more than one at a given time to spread your risk. Now, we go to smaller problems. So I define smaller problems as basically not a big problem, or problems you don't want to solve, or problems you hate solving. So this is like the HR, the compensation, customer service processes, you name it, right? Things that don't really excite you, but you have to do it anyway for your business to function. So our approach is quite simple, right? We always think of ways to reduce time. So for those who've studied basic computer science, the way we think about it is time complexity, right? And we use I use a technical notation of big O of what's the computational time. So always think about, okay, how can I minimize the time I'm spending on solving these smaller problems? So there's a couple of ways you can do it, right? The first one is, okay, a very, very simple decision tree. Is it urgent or important? Can I do it now? Do I need to do it now? If not, push it back. Let's say you determine, oh, it is important or urgent, I need to do it. Okay, so how can I do it? I can either do it myself, outsource it, or delegate it. And by outsourcing it, you're basically reducing the time complexity from the scales from n to basically constant time. And last but not least, you can also build internal processes so it's pre-solved every time you encounter it. So, for example, let's take Revolut as a practical example. We're at this stage where we actually have to have it's happening so often, we have to have internal processes. But initially, on early days, there was no processes, right? And we push the problem. If it wasn't important, we push the problem as far as we can. And as a general thumb, if a solution works and doesn't break, it's probably good enough. And only start thinking about automation when problems become big, right? i.e., risks of not doing it right can affect the business materially. And finally, execution. So there's two components of execution. The first one is essentially culture, right? And mission. So why, just think about when you hire, your employees, why do they want to wake up early, go to work, grind, 12, 13, 14, 15 hours a day, to work for you? Effectively, it's all about mission, right? So for us, it's quite simple. You can read it yourself. And the feedback we get is, people get extremely excited about our mission. They don't find this in any other company they work for. They usually, their backgrounds are usually, they either work in the big corporate and they just got bored of doing the same thing over and over again and want to do something exciting, right? They don't even care about the money anymore. They just want to do something fun and intellectually challenging, or build something very, very impactful on the world. And basically also defining our cultural values, right? So, we actually hold our basically cultural principles very, very, we hold it very, very importantly. So whenever someone deviates from that, we always go back to the fundamentals and see if all the actions are, contributing to those values. And most importantly, it's all about talent, right? I can't stress this enough. I think most people do, but I think this is the most important, what makes or breaks a startup in growth stage. So my personal learnings, build a good hiring process early, spend some time thinking about, okay, how can I get the best people? Although I have to say it's quite a boring job, but it's a very important problem to solve early. Big problems need good executors, the A players. So this will probably be, if you're founder, this is probably you on day one. But after day 2, day 3, you need people to execute for you, right? You need very, very good executors. So Like even at the size of Revolut today, we still struggle to hire A players. So what we do is we hire, future A players very, very early as I'd say fresh grads or recent grads, and basically train them up. They usually take 1 to 2 years to train up to be, a top performer. But I can tell you it's definitely worth it. Now, smaller problems, usually you need B players to maintain it. When people say you need A players for a whole company, it's simply not true. It's bullshit. You need B players to maintain the smaller problems, or you can opt in to, put some A players into solving smaller problems. However, just bear in mind they'll get bored very, very quickly. So you need, maybe 1 year later, you need a B player to maintain it. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was super helpful. We're still not done with you, actually. We're going to have our director, Matthias, who joined the family 1 year ago. He's going to ask you a couple questions about your experience, a bit more specific. Here you go.
Yes. Thank you. A hyper smooth transition. So in the audience was a mix of young founders and sort of current students. A lot of people sort of asking themselves what the next move or the first move in their career should be. Your first move, essentially career-wise, was to work at Revolut. You're the third employee. How did that happen? Like that's a pretty big decision to make. What made you decide to join Revolut so early on?
Yeah, so I actually saw one of the Revolut's first ever press articles. It's just popped up. I think it was in TechCrunch, so it popped up on my RSS feed. So I'd say it's pure luck that I actually even know about the company. So
what have you filtered your RSS feed with to find Revolut so early on? Because we want that, We're
yeah, I think it's pure luck. And then dig deeper into the product. I thought it was very, very cool. At the time, I think it just launched, so about 15,000 users. So it sounded like a lot there back then. And also wanted to join something like early stage, company. I also had offers from like bigger, more established companies, but it just wasn't interesting. It definitely paid better, but it wasn't interesting.
Because you joined before the x-axis even starts on most of your graphs. I see it was like maybe January 2016 or something, so you were hiding before that.
So I joined, the day I started was when there's 20-something thousand users. Yes.
20-something thousand users, yes. Right, yeah. So that was right at the beginning of your graph. And so can you just tell us a bit more about what the vibe was like when there was only 5 of you, 5 people, the sort of user to people ratio was pretty crazy. It's even bigger now. But sort of how you were managing the initial growth and sort of what your role initially involved, and how radically your job has changed since then.
Yeah, good question. So day one is basically doing everything, right? I was doing anything from picking up the phone to speak with an angry customer to doing finance, doing operations, doing product, absolutely doing everything, right? And
what did they ask you during the interview? Like, what did they sell you as a job?
They didn't really have to sell me. I was pretty convinced I would join anyway.
And so what's changed? What's changed?
Everything's changed. So now unfortunately, we're much bigger now. We can say fortunately, unfortunately. For me, it's fun, but at the same time not fun. So there's more hierarchy. We unfortunately have more processes than compared to earlier days. So we have a lot of processes. As a financial institution, we have to follow a lot of processes. And the regulators expect us to follow these processes. We can't just, decide, I have an idea, let's launch it tomorrow, right? We can't do that anymore. Things move slightly slower, but apart from that, I think the culture is still there. I think we still take big bets into big opportunities, and we're not afraid to take on the challenge.
And you take big bets on people as well. So I saw you mentioned it during your presentations that you're very willing to hire younger people, fresh grads or grads with just a couple of years experience. How do you sort of create a culture now that there's over 600 of you? How do you create a culture where people can sort of swiftly progress and not feel sort of stuck?
Yeah, it's a couple of ways we solve that. So first of all, on young people, we love to hire like future A players. simply because like it's very simple fact of life. Like if you're A player, and let's say you're more experienced and get, let's say late 20s or mid 30s or even late 30s, statistically you're getting more and more likely to want to start your own company. If you're A player and you have the experience and the means to do so. So actually, as you progress up the age brackets, it becomes more and more difficult, not impossible, but more and more difficult to hire these A players. So what do? We go as early as possible, right? We have these a bunch of these future A players coming out of university or coming out of the first job, and we're trying to snap them up straight away, and then train them to be the best A players. We also extract a lot of value from them because they solve a lot of problems for us, and for them, they potentially after Revolut they can start their own company, and I would say good for you.
You mentioned that you tried to be Bayesian, but obviously a lot of what startups involve initially is a huge amount of uncertainty. And so as Bayesian as one might want to be, it feels like establishing good priors is super, super complicated. And I was wondering, so you mentioned heuristics as a way to get those priors more or less right. What does that mean in sort of a day-to-day? And can you give an example of one decision where you try to be rigorous in your analysis of the probabilities of success of a new product or launching a new country?
Sure. So I can think of multiple examples, but I can just pick one. So is anyone familiar with the premium product we have? Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Okay. Do we have any premium users? Oh wow, that's a lot. Okay. So I actually launched premium. So one of the thoughts behind premium was actually quite simple, right? So if you look at, so this is where heuristics come in. So if you look at financial services, like very typically how the big banks they give you premium banking is basically based on your income or your wealth, right? One or the other, or a combination. So access to like anything from concierge to even as simple as travel insurance or like these premium features. You have to be making a lot of money or be super wealthy, right? Making upwards of $100,000, $150,000 a year, or have a net worth of over $1 million. Most of us is not in that bracket, right? And it's actually very, very unfair. So that's the first thing I identified. The second thing I identified was it's essentially access over ownership. So there's this big trend, like for example, if you look at the digital content space, like Netflix, Spotify. Essentially, people are willing. Essentially, it's more willing to pay for access fee to access like a huge database archive of digital content, rather than owning it. And in fact, they love it so much, it's beating free pirate downloads and reversing like a declining industry, right? So this is the second trend I identified. And the third trend I identified.
How does that apply to premium?
I'm gonna go to that. Yeah. And the third trend I identified was effectively like hassle-free lifestyle. People just want to let you solve the problem and just want to live a hassle-free. So effectively combining those three things. So for example, our pricing, it's like a monthly pricing, a very, very cheap monthly pricing, priced very, very similar, modeled against Netflix. So if in case you haven't noticed, we price it very, very similarly to Netflix in each market, right? That's the first thing we did. Because I had no idea how to price it, right? We have 0 data points. We didn't know what to sell, right? And the second thing was we bundle all the features that makes people's life easier. For example, free express delivery. So if you lose your card in Thailand, you can get a free card in 2-3 days time, right? Which no bank has ever done before. Like things like this. Basically, this is how we think about using heuristics without basically no data points and create a product, and that's how we launch it.
The reason I actually signed up to Revolut initially is quicker for me to create an account on Revolut and order my first card than it was to go to my existing bank and get a card delivered. And they were shutting down for like 2 weeks during Christmas or something. And that was the only way that I had to essentially access my money for a month. Yeah, that's something good. So you didn't tell me what the sort of access versus ownership was, what the analogy was.
Yeah, so for example, like you can order a limited number of premium cards. So in case you haven't noticed, you can, if you can get the rose gold one if you want. If you get bored, you can get like a black one or the silver one. We're launching even more colors soon. But essentially, it's like I feel like rose gold today, so I'm gonna pick my rose gold card. So you don't actually own the card, but we give you access to it. So that's a difference.
So premium was one of the things that you launched at Revolut. you're VP of operations, but it feels like so many things fall under that banner. I saw that you take care of international expansion, you take care of business development. One question is, how do you prioritize going sort of deep within one country, adding loads of new features that are specific to those users and expanding to a new one? And once you decide that you're going to expand, how do you approach prioritizing which countries you're going to be launching in? Is it because of the infrastructure? Is it because of sort of the spillovers? You're going into a country that you have a lot of expats that already are using Revolut. What's sort of the process?
Okay, so to answer your first question, we do both at the same time. To answer your second question, so
you do both at the same time, so you've never felt like you ever were compromising depth over breadth?
We need to do both at the same time.
Okay, that's good. And then in terms of how do you choose which countries you launch?
It's quite simple, really. So I go to Wikipedia, sort by biggest population.
Take out China.
Take out China, yes. China is difficult. And yeah, that's it.
And you go down from there?
Yeah.
You don't look at the existing infrastructure?
Yeah.
So the vibe is either it's going to be horrible and I'll build my own, or it's fine and I'll sort of use it to start off?
I mean, we reuse basically all the infrastructure we have. I mean, apart, like with one exception, right? But
apart from that, you build everything. That's a pretty brute force. So remind us what the countries are. How does Canada get in that bit? Or is it just because it's easy because it's close to the US?
It's actually easy. Like US and Canada comes in one. Australia, New Zealand comes in one. They're actually very, very similar in terms of, like, I actually oversimplify that. We also consider like things like regulation. But these countries' regulations are quite similar anyway, like the more developed worlds. Regulation is relatively easy, black and white, whereas if you go to like developing countries, the regulation is not even written on paper, right? And that's something a risk we don't really want to take. But high level, yeah, it's just population. I mean, so
you'd rather go in crowded markets with sort of swift regulation, than places where you'd have to be dealing with regulators all day long?
I mean, we deal with regulators all day long already. US is actually not as good as it seems. But yeah, countries like India, Indonesia, big countries, but no black and white regulation. So that's how we rule it out.
Yeah, I saw that you said that the sort of quality of the FCA and other British regulators was one of the reasons that you were very bullish on the UK staying sort of a very big financial hub.
Yeah, so before
before
we went international, we didn't actually realize how good UK was.
Only when you leave home that you realize.
Yes. Like US is not very good.
So okay, and in terms of features, you mentioned, actually, before we go on to features, very early on, so I think it was sort of early 2016, you decided to open Revolut to businesses, which now that you've told me that you don't really care about, you never really think about compromising breadth over depth, it makes a lot more sense. But I was wondering how, they are very different jobs, sort of, or seemingly different jobs, selling to consumers versus selling to businesses. I was wondering if there was anything that you'd learned or any crossovers that you hadn't expected between the two.
Yeah, so I'd say businesses are much more complicated than retail. So a lot of learnings. For example, in finance, there's a concept of due diligence. So you need to understand who your customers are. So when your businesses have loads of complicated corporate structures, like how the hell do you figure that out? So we've encountered like a lot more challenges to make the business product as good as we like it, right up to our standards. To this day, we're still like improving, innovating. But yeah, business product is definitely like a very, very difficult product to build.
And on that end, you didn't feel like you were compromising growth on one end to be focusing on the other? Or are they like, how integrated are the two activities? Yeah,
so basically we like to have individual teams per problem, right? So business is a team. And actually even within business, we divide it into teams. Expansion is a team, international expansion is a separate team. Retail, we have like over 10 teams, 10 product teams. We also have internal product teams. So every team basically work independently of each other. So that's how they don't have, we minimize a crossover.
Okay, because when you're launching a new country, you have new regulatory issues. Sometimes you have product tweaks, like how standardized is the product and how much.
Yeah, so we like to build infrastructure that basically allows us to configure. So without going into too much technical details, basically configure what you can see or what you can't see, what you can use, what you can't use in different countries.
And so how much flexibility do the country managers have when they're running their country?
Yeah, so we like to build scalable tools for us to do it. So once we do it once, we can reuse it again. So yeah, we really empower them to...
And so, yeah, they're sort of their own bosses, or are they working in London, flying back and forth all the time?
They fly all the time.
Okay, so everyone's here as home base. Cool, and before we open up to questions, I was wondering what's sort of the next feature that you're most excited by that you haven't mentioned yet?
Like for me, it's stock trading. I think,
Actually, I have one question before we open up. Crypto. So crypto was like a big announcement, and it was obviously at a time where everyone was trying to figure out how Coinbase worked. And I was wondering what sort of the Revolut view on crypto was today, because everything's down, people are a bit less interested, the feature's still there. I was wondering if, you had cool plans on it, either yourselves internally as a technology, if you were adding that to machine learning as a useless buzzword, what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, so cryptocurrency, I mean, my view is, I think it's a good chance to, be a very, very popular infrastructure, like whether it's payments or anything else in the future. Truly, we don't know, maybe. So our approach is quite simple. We work with different infrastructure providers, whether it's MasterCard, Visa, bank payments, or stock, broker clearing, infrastructure, or even cryptocurrency. We'll just build everything on top. So, whichever wins, wins.
It wins, it wins. If it doesn't, you don't really care.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, thanks a lot. And now we're going to open up to questions from all of you. Do we have a microphone that's... Here you go.
Yeah. Questions, anyone? Yes.
Hi, thank you. So I was wondering, when you do new features like business or you did premium, what kind of validation do you do? So do you do more deep interviews, or what kind of research do you do that you kind of like find the data that you can base your decisions on?
Sometimes we do a survey, but if we're very, very sure, we just... That's it, yeah. Heuristics.
Easy. Here we go.
Hey, just going back to the fact that you launched Premium, and a question with regards to what you were talking about in terms of internalizing processes versus outsourcing. What kind of metrics were you looking at when you decided to bring on your travel insurance and your concierge service for Premium users, as to whether you were going to internalize it and build your own supplier agreements, or outsource it and white label some of the offers?
I mean, actually, concierge is an easy one. It's way too complex for us to handle. I mean, concierge is we handle like a lot of ad hoc scenarios where it's very, very difficult to automate. So that's where we decided, just outsource it. And there are plenty of companies that do concierge better than we do. So and we just manage them via SLAs.
So you said you encourage employees to think 10x, but how do you get to do actual work?
Sorry, what's the question?
So it's very easy to get lost in thinking how we could do that and that and that, and then it's Friday evening and you haven't done any work. So how do you balance thinking outside the box and being ambitious and actually getting in the weeds and making things happen?
Yeah, so good question. So we have like, so every 6 months we do like an internal review of basically a roadmap, what we need to deliver next 6 months, what will we deliver last 6 months. We basically think about new things, right? Try and formalize it every 6 months, right? So whether it's, for example, metal was, the new metal plan was one of the new big things we were going to launch last 6 months. Next 6 months, the 3 items I listed was, as an example, like one of them. So we spend most of our time, like 99% of the time, actually executing, but minority but important amount of time thinking, how can we win big?
You have very good investors. Can you say a little bit what is their input into, like strategy and team management, and then Revolut? Because the way you organize teams, how do you build that? What is Revolut and what is advised by your investors? Can you say a little bit about that?
So I don't follow the question.
So in terms of a company, right, you have organizational, all these things that you've been talking about. These are processes of how to do things. Yeah. You have very big investors that scaled other very big companies. Can you say what has been their input on that and what has been created by Revolut's culture? So what is advised and what is organic?
I see. So majority of investors, they usually give advice in terms of like what, how other companies have done it. But I would say majority is figuring out by ourselves.
Good. Cool. Thanks. Really pretty graphs. Unfortunately, they were skipped over. I think in one where you just were depicting like your user growth over time, where you're now like 2.8 million users, and it was like sans paid marketing. How did you do that? How did you grow so quickly without paid marketing?
It's all about product. So we invest. So if you look at our product team, like our product, we're a product organization. So over half our employees are working in product one way or another. So the other part is basically the customer service. So half our company is essentially customer service. We only have it because we have no other way to solve that problem. So yeah, effectively good product, which gets word of mouth growing. I mean, yeah, that's it.
Cool.
Hi. So you said you joined employee number 3, which is similar to the position I joined in, and you said you're doing everything and anything. What made you want to go into operations? And also, what is your plan for further down the line? You said you hire people that want to become founders. Do you have plans to start your own company as well?
Okay. So first question is, to be honest, like the title doesn't really matter. I mean, if you compare what Revolut Ops does, I mean, we don't really do ops, like the typical ops. I mean, we don't really, ops in many companies, I think it's customer service, sales, HR. We don't do any of that. We mostly do, internal products, infrastructure products, occasionally BD. I mean, it's really, the way I think about it is quite simple, right? You have a problem, right? And if you're the best person to solve that problem, go do it. And basically operations kind of evolved as the company evolved. So we do more and more things. That doesn't really fit into the typical operations. So we don't really bound ourselves into our titles really. Sorry, what was the second question?
What are your plans for down the line?
Oh, yes. No idea.
Around here, no, yes.
Thank you very much. So my question was regarding the first community of users. How, when launching the app, what was your approach and go-to-market to reach this community, the early adopters mainly?
Good question. So whenever we go to a new market, we effectively put like someone on the ground who's like ambassador number 1. That usually they themselves were the early adopters, like the first 1,000, first 5,000, and they just love the product so much they decide to join us and become like advocate, and they do like events like these, right, to spread the word, and it starts to kindle the word of mouth, and then it starts growing like crazy. That's how we do it.
And did you have like specific milestones to reach in terms of number of users? What was your long-term like strategy? Was it like month 1 I have to reach 500 users and then scale it to 1,000, 2,000? Were you like having a proper strategy on that, or?
Not really.
Not really.
Just get as many as you can.
Okay.
So when you're going to become a bank, there are a few processes that are needed when you kind of verify people to be able to join. What's going to happen to the ones that have already joined, and will you have to put in place a few more processes?
Yeah, good question. So actually what we have today is not so different to, like from a customer perspective, not so different, right? So what you see in the app will basically be the same. The difference between being a bank and not being a bank is really the pipes of how we do internal things. And we need a lot more, like, for example, internal processes to make sure the customer funds are safe. We don't take risky bets on the client funds, like, what the banks decided to do before 08, et cetera, et cetera. But, from a customer perspective, it's basically the same. The plus side is you get deposit insurance.
Quick question for me, actually, about yourself, but also about Revolut in general. How do you look at competition? How closely do you watch competitors, like, say, Monzo, for instance? Do you benchmark yourself comparing to how they're doing? Do you look for information around there about them? Or do you just not care and go through your path?
Yeah, we don't really see them as a competition, really. I mean, they try to effectively replace existing bank with, something more digital. Whereas our approach is more customer centric. So we get a bunch of customers. We ask them, okay, what are your problems? And we listed a couple of problems there, which we like to solve for our customers. And we make some money out of the way, then great. We have a profitable business, and then that's how we kind of evolved, right? So that's how we change our minds. For example, we didn't want to be a bank initially, but in fact, a lot of the problems we want to solve for the customer requires us being a bank, so therefore we have to be a bank. So that's how we really think, right, about the problem. And in fact, if you look at our roadmap next 6 to 12 months, not everything is about financial services even. It's all about solving a problem for the customer.
Awesome. Any other questions? Final questions? Yeah.
Thanks. You talk about how important hiring is and finding what you call A players outside of identifying them through working for investment banks or having started a startup themselves. Are there any kind of characteristics you look for specifically?
Yeah. To be honest, like A player is a very, very high level generic term. So specifically what we usually do is we test how analytical they are. Basically how good they are at problem solving. So what we usually do is we ask them question like, what's the most complex problem you solved? And then ask them about stating the problem statement, and then work us through how they solve the problem. The reason we ask this is to see how they approach the most complicated problem they face in life, whether it's a career or university, and see how they solved it. And if they solved it very, very well, then we know they're smart and the potential to be A players.
Sorry, me again. Going back to you being one of the first employees at Revolut, and again going back to hiring A players, what kind of process did you guys take when it came to cap table, for example? Obviously, being quite an early stage startup, you had to attract the best people, and how did you go about doing that in terms of incentivizing them?
Sorry, in terms of like stock options?
So stock options. I mean, salary, obviously, you might not have the ability to match in terms of the bigger institutions, but in terms of stock options, how did you start off initially, and how did that develop as you grew as a company?
Yeah, I think it was one of those things where there was no process. Like, it was one of the smaller problems. The founder decided not to solve early, so there was no process. So yeah, it was basically benchmarking like what other companies were offering, and we're offering something similar. At the end, now we have a formula for everything. So for every given role or seniority, now there's a formula. But early days it was quite ad hoc, and we usually value potential new employee on an ad hoc basis.
Thank you for coming along tonight. My question is in regards, what kind of internal tools do you use to manage your productivity, your tasks, and overall, how are you using those tools to help you to kind of manage your tasks, time, and priorities?
Okay. I mean, to be honest, we only use like tools most people use, like Slack, Trello, Jira.
And in terms of kind of overall like comments, communications, giving somebody like feedback and tracking that feedback if that has been done or updated or...
Yeah, we use... Yeah, so we have like, in terms of like employee 360 feedback, we use like a tool like Lattice. But yeah, effectively it's like a more fancy Google form. I mean, it's nothing special about the tools we use.
Okay, thank you. Do you use, for example, like any, I don't know, CRM platforms to actually create reports, dashboards, or?
Oh, so for dashboards, we use an open source dashboard platform, which we kind of use to build like an in-house tool for dashboards. So basically, like we empower all employees to have access to, depending on what the role is, data on our transactions and to serve it to our customers, so they can make more data-driven decisions.
Cool. Last question. Anyone? Yeah.
Thank you. Can you give us an example of a feature or product that you launched and it failed and what you learned from it?
Thinking which one? Yeah, I think a good example was credit. So unfortunately, when we launched it, we didn't know our customers, whether they are in the prime market or subprime category or near prime. We just had no idea, right? So basically, we partnered with like a prime lender, and what we realized is majority of the customers are not prime. So majority of the credit requests actually got declined, and one of the reasons is we have a lot of expats, like European expats. They just, for example, you grew up in France, now you work in UK. Recently, you don't really have a credit score, let's say in the UK, even though you could be making like very, very good money. Right, you could be working for a reputable employer, like I don't know, like a big investment bank, making 6 figures, but yet your credit score is not very good. So we had a lot of cases where these people got declined. So actually, that's one of our motivations why we want to build our own credit system. Effectively, it's a credit system without borders, right? So imagine, even if you move from France to UK, like if you tell us, if you've seen, you moved from France and UK and you have a Revolut account, we can actually do, like, for example, credit score check using your French credit score, and then lend you in, let's say, GBP, right? And we can do that globally, anywhere from US, Singapore, etc., etc. So we want to build like how we did for payments, credit without borders.
Would you have a currency exchange rate risk with that? Since you say you would.
Of course.
So if I'm French, working here, and I take a loan out from you, would that be a euro loan that you are charging me in pounds, or how would it?
You can choose.
Okay.
Clever. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you, Matthias. Amazing having you all here.
Que la famille.